our project management overview webinar. My name is Julie Zarowski. I am the Vice President of the Management Consulting Group for New Resources Consulting. What my team does is we work with organizations across various industries on project management, business analysis, change management. We do a little bit of everything from helping with training to doing PMO assessments, to running projects for organizations, to partnering with project managers in organizations to help them be more successful as they go through projects. The goal of this webinar today is just to give that high-level overview of project management and how anybody in the organization can implement some of the project management methodologies. Many organizations do have PMOs that have processes and pieces that are established. They use project management for large initiatives, whether it's implementing electronic health record systems, implementing ERP systems. But at the end of the day, even what we do on a day-to-day basis from a support perspective, implementing some simple project management processes really helps organizations be more successful. I will briefly touch a little bit on waterfall versus agile, or the blend of those two methodologies together. We'll talk about some project management processes and controls. I'll give a short summary, and then we'll have some time for questions. There is a chat functionality in the webinar, so I do have someone with me here, Jill Means. She's monitoring that chat session. We will wait to the end, and then we'll go back to any questions that we have, either through the chat or that you have as we come through at the end. We'll take live questions as well. So what is project management? Project management is a blend of art and science. While there are some tools and techniques that we do, there's a lot of art that's involved through the processes that we utilize. From the art side, there's judgment calls. When you're working with teams, you got to figure out what are those tools you need to apply, the rigor that you need to use, what's the right level of control, how you're delivering messages. There's a lot of soft skills that are utilized through project management, which is the coaching, the mentoring, a lot of being a politician, making sure that you're getting your teams to do what they need to do at any time, making sure that your leaders are engaging in the process. Sometimes you have to be a mediator. That can be between team members. That can also be between two different leaders. So there's a lot of different soft skills that are used through that project management process. To help us facilitate those, we utilize some tools. A charter, which we'll talk about all of these tools in a little bit, but a charter really sets that vision. Where are you going? What are you trying to do with that effort? And again, these can be small efforts, and it may be a one-page charter, but just something that you can anchor back to and everybody can agree to. This is what we're trying to do. A work plan. How are you getting that work done? What does it look like at any time when you go back to and look at that work that's there? An issue log. Issues happen every day. It's okay. That's part of the process. That's part of the evolution. Understanding a risk log. What are those things that could possibly happen, good or bad, and do we have sight on those? Communications. You'll hear me state through this presentation multiple times that with everything that we utilize as a project manager, communications is 90% of what we have to do, whether that's communicating up, down, across. It's key to the success of any effort that's going on in an organization. Some of the processes we use is doing weekly statuses, being proactive when changes come through. Changes are okay. They are not all bad. They are okay. We just have to have a process to address those changes, and that happens through the change control. Project management helps organizations or helps teams define what is the goal and the objective that we're trying to do with this effort that's in front of us. That can be this is something that we need to get done in 3 weeks, or this is something that's going to take 3 months, or on large efforts, which is a little bit beyond the scope of this webinar, but something that's going to take 3 years. And what do we need to do to get all those pieces done? Planning, understanding what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, what impact it's going to have on the cost, on schedule, on scope, what actually needs to be done. Motivating the team, we talked a little bit about that already, that you have a lot of roles as a project manager or team lead, and we all live in a world today where we have to get more done with less resources, and there's a variety of reasons for that, but it is just the state that we're in today. Monitoring, understanding what's happening, how do you need to react, what needs to occur next. Completing, the goal of this is to have a plan, to stick to that plan, and make sure that we complete something at the end. And once again, my favorite topic for project management is that communicating. Proactively communicating to your stakeholders, and when I say stakeholders, it can be your teammate, it can be your equivalent manager or leader that you're working with, it can be leadership up, it can be a customer, it can be a client, but communicating proactively is key to the success of any project. The triple constraints of a project, although they continue to call them triple constraints, there are more pieces to those constraints. So you have your traditional time, cost, and scope. How much time do we have? How long is it going to, or how much time do we have? What is it going to cost? And how much are we trying to get actually completed in that time frame? Other factors that you have to consider is, what's the risk that would happen if we completed or if we didn't complete this project? What resources do I need? Resources in all of the clients and team members that I work with, resources is a key challenge that many organizations have now. And again, we have to think about our work differently to figure out how we're going to get done the work that we need to get done with the number of resources that we have. What's the quality? Again, some people are like, we all want the best quality. That's absolutely true, but throughout the project, there are certain things where we can say, we can live with that piece of the website working this way because there are 3 ways for them to get through. We have the 3, 4 might be optimal, but with the time that we have, we're going to work with the first 3 that we have. And then understanding the requirements, what does success look like to that stakeholder that you're working with? A leader that I had a long time ago translated the triple constraint into good, cheap, and fast. In that format there, at the end of the day, you generally can pick 2. If you want something good and cheap, it generally is not going to be fast. If you want something fast and cheap, you're generally not going to get the same quality. To put all 3 of those pieces together, right now, at least in my experience with all the different projects and all the different teams that I touch, you generally have to determine for the organization which 2 of those are the driving factors, and then understand that the other one, there may be some sacrifices from that perspective. Educating your customers and your leaders, again, leaders of the organization, everybody has pressures on them from different parts of the organization, so while you're trying to run your teams and support your teams, your leaders have pressures, whether depending on what level they're at, it can be up their chain, it can be over to the board of directors. Everybody has needs to get more and more things done in a faster time frame and less costly. But explaining and putting together the data so you can explain why we have to pick if it's good and fast that it's going to be more expensive, or if it's fast and cheap that we may have some quality that we're missing there. But putting the pieces together to explain that information, sometimes it doesn't make it any better, and sometimes at the end of the conversation your leaders may still say they want it, but at least you have that information documented, and when you have to have those conversations, you can anchor those conversations on facts and data. When we have a lot of projects to get done in a short amount of time, there becomes a lot of stress points, and to be able to take out some of that emotion and anchor back to some of the data helps facilitate those conversations going forward into, yet again, my favorite topic, communication. What is project management, or the value of project management? It helps provide some structure. It helps provide some expectations. if everybody understands, here's our status report and we're going to have these 10 fields, and if you're serving a stakeholder, but they have 10 other groups that are serving that same stakeholder, they know every time they get information from you, they can consistently know where and how to find the information to communicate back to you. By having some of those consistencies, whether it's through a project plan, through a requirements collection process, through testing, through a status report, it helps provide more efficiency, and then you are able to use those processes on a repeatable basis. Being able to do that, the goal is to reduce costs, reduce the cycle time, reduce some of those risks, and continue to deliver success. It's not perfect. At the end of the day, we can put all these tools and these processes together. We try to manage some of the external forces that are coming at us, but we have to be ready to be flexible and to communicate, and that's where that goes to project management is 80% art and 20% science of what has to happen. This is one of my favorite pictorials or favorite slides to use when I'm talking about project management, and it doesn't matter what methodology that you're using, Scrum or Agile or Waterfall, and some will say, well, if we do it this way, everything gets better. At the end of the day, while we all speak the the English language if we're from the United States, I have many times when I'm talking to my team and I really think I'm speaking in English, and then when they regurgitate back to me what I said, I'm like, well, obviously I must have been speaking a very different language because we missed. But that's where using some of these tools, we can start to narrow this gap. So as you see in the upper left-hand corner, customer sits down, explains what they're looking for. They want a swing. They want 3 tiers on the swing. We think we understood it. Project leader, like, well, you wanted a swing, but unfortunately our swing goes through the middle of the tree. The engineering team came in, and at least the swing was able to swing, but not very effectively. We sent it over to the programming team, and they did get a swing on the tree. Fortunately, it can't swing. And I love my sales team, but there's how my sales team explained it. They're going to get a recliner with the sun coming from the back of them. The project documentation, we'll talk a little bit about that next, coming up here in a few slides. Documentation, this happens often. The one thing that we try to skimp on when we're tight under pressure is the documentation, but it is important so we have something to anchor back to talk about the facts and make sure we can validate that understanding. Unfortunately, some of our operations team, when we have to make that transition from we were in a project mode and we completed the project mode and we have to transition that to another team, there's pieces that we're always missing for that. As a consulting organization, this one is sometimes true because depending on how the work came in and how our agreement was, the billing went up and down because there wasn't any consistency that went across. Our poor help desk, again, because we've missed some of the other pieces upstream, they go to actually support it and they're missing some of the documentation of the information they need, and it becomes very challenging. And at the very end, we truly found out what the customer needed was actually they wanted a tire swing. What makes a good project manager? Somebody needs to be confident, passionate about what they do. If you love what you do and you love helping your team members and you love helping the departments of your organization move forward, that's going to come out in any effort that you're moving through. An effective communicator. And communication is not just, well, I said it and I wrote it in one way. It's understanding that everybody comes to a project with different perspectives. If I'm in the IT world and I'm a developer, I have a very technical repertoire that I use and I pull from. If I'm my business user, if I'm working in one of my healthcare systems and I am the nursing manager, but I'm working on a project for HR that's talking about how they're going to do their timesheets, well, that nursing manager has a full repertoire and they understand all of the items that are needed to run the nursing unit on the floor. Not that they're not very intelligent and they can't run their team and understand what needs to happen from a time tracking, but there's different vernacular, and we have to make sure we bridge those gaps and understand and listen when they ask questions back to us and confirm that they really understood. A project manager needs to be a team player. I recently read some documentation that, actually made me a little sad. I know there's a different push-pull between waterfall and agile, and somebody had the project manager described as somebody that just wants to be in command and control. At the end of the day, the project manager is part of the team. They're the one out there that needs to be helping the facilitation. They need to be moving roadblocks for the team as they're coming through. They need to be the one when the leaders come down and they have questions, that they're that first line of defense. So being a project manager, yes, you have different responsibilities than your team, but you are part of that team. You have to be able to work with various levels of the organization. You have to be able to talk to that executive level. The executive level, I call them the C-spot run team members, right? The higher you go up from the communication, you have to be able to communicate up to that higher level effectively and make sure that they understood. But because those executive levels or those senior levels or the VP levels, they have 35, 40, 50, 70 of these things going on all at the same time. So they're not looking to read the status report that is 22 pages long. They need that summary. They need to understand, are we green? If we're not green, what's happening? What are we doing to get back to green? Do we need to change a date? Do I need to change scope? But we need to communicate in, again, that C-spot run format. I also need to be able to communicate with my team members. So if I'm working on the technical side, I need to be able to communicate so that they understand from those tech specs that my analyst provided over to the technical team, so that they can go and they can get the coding done and that there's communication between the two. And one item that I don't have on here, but it's very true, as a project manager, that team leader, you need to be an interpreter. I talked about, all thinking that we're speaking the same English language, but there are different skill sets. My nursing team understands what they need to do from getting the patient transported from the ED department up to the floor and what steps have to happen and what documentation needs to occur. My developer knows what they need to do behind the scenes to make that code work if we're talking about one system or two systems, but sometimes we have to be a translator between those two worlds there. As a project manager, you need to be able to react dynamically. That is not easy for me to say this morning. You need to be able to make those decisions quickly. And again, I'll anchor back to some of the tools and some of the processes that we have to anchor back to. We all like to multitask, or many project managers like to multitask. When you come back to being able to make those decisions, if you don't have that documentation to go back and anchor to, while you can do great, if you don't do that, you're going to have something that's going to slip, and that may end up being very costly. And lastly, we've already talked about it a couple times, is understanding the project management, understanding the different methodologies, the processes and tools, and then understanding when is the right time to use which ones. All right, hold on a second. Sorry. All right, so I'm going to briefly talk about the methodologies. So one item that I want to note here is I have waterfall versus agile. So in project management, I'm sure many of you have heard that there is PMI, which is the Project Management Institute, has their PMBOK, which is the Project Management Body of Knowledge. That is not a methodology. That is a collection of tools and different ways to utilize those tools to successfully move projects forward. The PMBOK does not specifically say you need to have these X documents in this X order to be successful. It is the body of knowledge. From a methodology, though, there is waterfall, which has been what some people call traditional project management, and the reason is it starts on the left-hand side of the screen there. You start at the conception of the project, you move into initiation. So conception is the business case. Initiation is everything got approved. We're going to start doing this project, getting your charter set up, understanding the parameters. The analysis is, here's what we had a scope. What are the true requirements behind the scope? Then you move to designing that product or that service. Then you actually do the construction. So if you're doing a business-related project, it might be establishing the process or the workflow, how the patient is going to flow through the clinic. Or if you're doing a technology project, it might be how you're configuring or developing the system. You're going to test that, and then you're going to deploy. There are many projects that really, that is the ideal way to actually implement and do that system, especially projects that have one large go live that is going to impact everyone. Now you can do some iterative processes throughout that process, but for instance, if I'm going to be implementing a new ERP system, I'm going to be moving from PeopleSoft to Workday or to Oracle Cloud, there's a lot of pieces that have to happen there, and everything needs to come to the end that we have a final testing piece on it. Now, you might do some of that development iteratively, but at the end of the day, it goes through that process to make sure we have everything complete. I spent a lot of time implementing electronic health records, and we had to implement at 30, 40, 50, 60, sometimes 100 clinics. Our initial step of getting everything set up, we did in a waterfall format. When we moved from clinic to clinic, we did that more in an iterative process as we enhanced our processes at each clinic we went. The other, one of the other top methodologies is the Agile methodology. And again, that you start at conception, you do initiation and analysis, but you're starting to iterate through each of these, right? You get one or two of your items on your product backlog, you work through those, you release those into production, you move through the next one. So an example of this may be as we've implemented large systems, whether that's a EHR system or that's an ERP system, now we want to add some new functionality, you run through those iterations. If I'm launching a new website, I know that I can probably get the core functionality of the website up, but I know we're going to have additional enhancements that we want people to utilize. If you're in mobile technology, again, you get that initial app up, but you know that you're going to have iterative releases that you're going to put more functionality in, so you're going to keep that product going over. Both of these methodologies require active participation from all of the team members, from your customer to what they're expecting, to the team that's actually completing the work. It's very important to have that participation. And both of them, while there's certain aspects that the team can self-manage, at the end of the day, the leaders are always looking for where are we and what's next on the roadmap and how can we get there. Stepping into the actual processes, why do we plan? There are many people who go on vacation and just say, I'm going to go on vacation, and they get in their car and they drive and they show up someplace and they're all good. A lot of us, however, when we go on vacation, we identify months ahead of time where we're going to go, how we're going to travel. Are we going to take a plane? Are we going to take the car? Are we going to take a train? You identify where you're going to stay when you get to the vacation. You identify, at least initially, maybe what some of the activities are going to be. I'm going to sit on the beach. I'm going to go to Disney World. I'm going to go to Epcot first. I'm going to go to Animal Kingdom second. But you have an idea of what you're going to do. You understand what the risks are. If I'm going to travel to Florida, southern Florida, between the months of August and October, it's hurricane season. I need to understand that that's a risk. That could happen. I may have to change things that occur during that time. You schedule the activities for the plan. You understand what your resources are, so who's going on vacation with me. The procedures for the plan, you have to check into the airport. You have to check if you're going to have luggage with you. You understand the roles and responsibilities, so you make sure who's packing the toothpaste. Got to make sure you got toothpaste. And then you have interaction of all those different project activities there. So while many of us are in roles where, we do this for a living day-to-day and we have to get new functionality up in a system, there's new legislation that's coming down in our ERP world that we support a lot of customers for. There were tax law changes that went in that were approved at the end of December of 2017. For all of our HCM, our human resource capital systems, those tax law changes all have to be adjusted in the code. So when the paychecks are generated, that people get the correct taxes withheld. We have to plan. We have to understand what's going to happen. We have to get all those pieces in place. All right. So what is a plan? So many people use the word project management plan and what I would call project schedule interchangeably. In reality, the project management plan really includes a lot of different pieces, and we're going to talk about each of these pieces. And this is the documentation by the end of the week that Jill will have sent out to anybody who is interested. And these are some simple documents that can be used for anything from a small 3-week plan to even up to a large 3-year plan. Like I said, many organizations have these templates, but I'm happy to share the simplistic versions that I have that I think help anchor back to get the work done. What you need to do in that project management plan is you need to identify what needs to be done, how you're going to accomplish those tasks and who's going to do it, how long it's going to take, how you're going to monitor it, make sure that you have the closeout, and then reviewing what was done or those lessons learned. We'll go through each of these documents, so the charter and the scope, the resource management, the schedule, communication, issue log, risk log, your cost, the quality of the testing, and then the lessons learned. Your charter or your scope, again, this really becomes, for lack of better terms, I'm going to say this becomes the contract. This becomes that anchor document. This is what we said we were going to do, and this is the reason why we are doing it. What's the goals? What's the benefit for the organization? For many of us who are in the IT world, we support organizations, but at the end of the day, many of those organizations, their primary product is not IT. Their primary product is healthcare. It's research. It's toilet paper. It's, laundry detergent. So they have a different product that they're selling, but we're supporting them. But to understand why we're making these changes in the IT and how that's going to support that organization, what's the return on investment? If we make this change, we're able to get X number of patients through the emergency room faster because we can collect the data in a better format. And then how do we actually measure to some of those pieces? The size and complexity of the project will really determine the length of the charter. If I have a 3 to 6 week project, my charter is probably only going to be 1 page, maybe even a half a page. But I want to make sure what's the problem we're trying to solve, what do we actually have in scope for that project, what is the goal of it, what's the benefit, how long is it going to take, and who are my team members that need to be involved. The next piece of the charter, which can be a little bit more complex, especially if your project is a little bit more complex, is the scope and requirements area. Defining what that problem is, identifying what is currently happening today, what do you want that to be, state to be, and then what items are actually excluded. As I stated, I spent a lot of years helping organizations implement their electronic health records, and while a lot of organizations had technology systems that they utilizing the electronic health record took both of those systems as well as a lot of manual processes and manual documents. Many of the physicians, when they would go in to see the patient, had paper charts that they would be able to flip through. While we were establishing our scope and our scope and requirements in those areas, it's understanding what was that current state and what were those key pieces of information that those physicians were looking for so that we could make sure that that was available and readily accessible in the electronic format. And we can have a whole separate seminar or webinar or support session that we're still working through many of those items in the electronic health world that, you know, again, everybody has a different view on things. But that's a different webinar. Once you have that charter established and you understand what the scope is, it's really understanding who's going to be part of your team and what are their areas of expertise going to be. We will provide a RACI chart, or responsible, accountable, consult, and inform. Again, depending on the length and the complexity of your project, this can be as simple as a one-page Excel document with 5 or 6 key deliverables on, and identifying who that responsible person is for that. So if I'm doing an as-is state and I'm working on an ERP implementation and I'm in the finance area and I'm working on the GLs and how the GLs should be set up, I'm going to need to make sure that my controller is in there as responsible. So that controller has gone through and said, here's our current state, here's how our business units sit today, and here's how I want my chart fields to look going forward. Accountable is who's helping get that completed. Consult would be, in the example I just gave, if we're setting up a new ERP system, the consult would be, well, this impacts finance. I also need to make sure that, you know, we have people that are tied to each of these cost centers or those chart fields. So I'm going to need to consult the HR department so that they understand. I have a revenue cycle group that all the funds coming into the organization, they're going to filter up to that, so I need to consult them. And then the inform is to make sure that everybody on the team, all the stakeholders on the team, are informed of those decisions that were made or the impact that had on that deliverable that we were moving forward with. The schedule and work plan, this is what are those activities? And again, this can be as complicated, or I shouldn't say complicated, as in-depth as a Microsoft project plan that has a lot of dependencies and everything all calculated for you. And again, it's not necessarily the tool. There's a multitude of online tools as well as traditional tools like Microsoft Project and Primavera. But it can be as simple as, here's my Excel spreadsheet. Here's the tasks that need to be done. Here's when we start. Here's when we end. Here's how many days or hours it's going to take. And here's the resources I have assigned. The piece with the schedule of the work plan in a lot of these documents is they are living documents. It's not just putting a schedule together once and never looking at it again. That becomes one of your anchor documents. What did we complete this week? What do we have on task for next week? Where are we behind? Where are we ahead? What are we going to do if we're behind? Do I need to add more resources? Do I need to move the task out? Who do I need to communicate to? So it's not just establishing that list, it's utilizing that list on a day-to-day basis. To help put that schedule or that work plan together, doing a work breakdown structure helps with that. Now, some people who do this work on a regular basis, you can do this work breakdown structure in your head. You don't need to put it down on paper. If it's a brand new system that you're bringing in, we had a customer that we just spoke to yesterday that they're currently using a system called ImageNow to scan their documents in. They're going to be moving to a new system developed by Canon. So while they understand what's happening now, working with the new vendor might be different, so they may have to go through a process like this. The example that we have up here, again, I always try to relate examples back to real life stuff because we have a diverse group that we present these to. So if I'm going to have a snack in the living room, well, what do I need to do though? I want a drink, I want a sandwich, and I'm going to need something to transport that. What are the things that I need to do to get my drink? Well, I need to go to the refrigerator and I need to get the juice and I need to get a glass. And if I broke that down even further, then I would get to the task level, which is, you know, remove the juice from the refrigerator, pour the juice into the glass. And the same thing for creating the sandwich or arranging the tray to actually carry that into the organization. Well, you can carry it into the organization, but you might want to just take it to the living room in this example. See, and as a project manager, you have to be ready to laugh at yourself. So I'm pretty good at This is an example of a Microsoft project plan. Again, with Microsoft Project or even one of the online tools, Smartsheets, Initas, there's a variety, PlanView. In using an actual project tool, you can link the dependencies and you can start to get on the right-hand side is a view of a Gantt chart, so you get a visual of what's actually happening. There are actually, for some of the simpler projects, if you have any of the newer versions of Excel, I'd say 2013 up to Microsoft Office Online, there are project templates that you can download and that do something similar to this, that they have macros built in. They're a little bit, you got to make sure that you understand how they're working, but they can do the same thing for you. My rule of thumb is most project plans should be between 100 and 150 lines, depending on, that's a pretty complex. If you start to break the tasks down too far, it becomes too hard to manage. When you get past that point, and I do know, I mean, I've seen and I've worked with project plans that are thousands of lines. At the end of the day, there really are multiple work streams within that project plan. The more complexity you add, the harder it becomes to manage. So breaking that work down into small, manageable pieces helps you manage the team, but also communicate up to the leadership. An important part about the schedule, the work plan, is that you can identify that critical path. What's the longest path through your plan? So if one of those tasks gets delayed, your go live is going to get delayed. What's the shortest path through that plan? So what are the shortest pieces that actually need to be done so you can complete that project on time? The plan with the least amount of float. So float is, you know, if I have any ability to move things around, where is that and how can I use that? It's important to know that there can be more than one critical path and that critical path can change as you're moving tasks around, and that the critical path are your key activities that you really should be managing through that project plan. My favorite topic, again, communicate, communicate, communicate. While we have a lot of tools and techniques that we've shared so far with you here, at the end of the day, all of them do one thing, which is help you support the communication that you need to do, whether it's in weekly team meetings or daily stand-ups with your team, communicating to your leadership, communicating to your sponsors, depending on the size of the project, or even within some operational organizations, that steering committee of what's actually happening. There are different ways to communicate, and I haven't updated this slide, but I need to. So I have, you know, daily stand-up meetings, your weekly status reports. There are a lot of technologies, Slack, GitHub, Jira can be used, instant messaging, different ways that you can do that collaboration that are becoming more and more intertwined into our day-to-day items there. You know, how to communicate. We have meeting agendas. If you're going to have a meeting, make sure you have an agenda. What happens a lot of times in project meetings, if you don't have an agenda, is you end up sliding into a topic, which is important. And the other piece, not just about having the agenda, it's having the ability, when you start sliding off of that agenda, putting that item or that topic on a parking lot and saying we need to schedule another 30 minutes or let's stay on for 15 minutes after this call, but going back and anchoring back to that agenda, did we cover everything that we needed to? That was important. And then your status reports, making sure somebody understands the health and the status of the project. I apologize, I think this is a duplicate slide. Up in the upper right-hand corner is an example, a sample example of a status report. So in this instance, that project was green. We understood where we were from scope and resources and schedule. We had some key accomplishments and some upcoming activities. Again, there are a lot of tools today that you can do all of this online and dynamically, which is great. But it's still important to have this information to be able to anchor back to and say, were we all on the same page? Is there anything that needs to change from that perspective? Monitoring and controlling is part of that communications, but having an issue log, changes happen. The world happens around us while we're working on a project. It doesn't stay stagnant. So while we may have thought of something, even if I have a 3 or 4 week project, and on day 1 of the project, I had assumptions or I believed that the world was in one state, all of a sudden something has changed and it's in a different state. An example that I have is back when 9/11 had occurred, I was working in the financial organizations, and we were actually doing a large project for cash letters, which is how money moves in between banks. And at that time, the money moved in between the banks, literally physically checks were taken from one bank, they were put on planes, they were moved to the Federal Reserve, they were cleared through that, and then they were distributed to the originating banks. When 9/11 occurred, all of the planes stopped, which meant that all of the money stopped moving through our country. Within 6 months after that happened, all checks had to be distributed electronically, so if we ever had that situation happen again, that the money wouldn't stop moving. Well, I was midstream in a project that was changing how we were going to transport those checks, even from an airplane mode. We had to make a lot of adjustments to change our world from that perspective. That's a large example, but they can happen any day at any time. A risk log, again, risks can be positive or negative, but understanding what may occur is important. Identifying, if I'm doing a project on some of our ERP or HCM projects, right? So we had some customers that were going live. As the leadership of our country changed, we knew that there were going to be changes coming forward. So as the Congress started putting the bills in front, and then they went to the Senate on changing those tax laws, we had to add to our risk logs that as we're implementing these systems, we may have to make a change to the coding to understand that we're going to have to adjust to those new tax laws and make sure that the paychecks are calculated correctly. Having visibility of that didn't change any of our activities right at that time, but once the final legislation came through and we knew what the dates were, we had it on our risk log, then that became an action through our process. Once you know the issues and the risks, we all have to keep track of cost. That can be different for different organizations. Internally, generally when you're keeping track of the costs, you're keeping track of the hours. How many hours are we spending? If you're a consulting organization like ours is, we keep track of those, not only the hours, but those actual costs and any travel expenses. And communicating that back and being upfront and open about what's happening is essential to making sure that everything stays on track from that cost perspective. Sorry. Another part of monitoring and controlling is quality testing. So once you have all the pieces in place, and again, this happens both on the Agile world as well as the Waterfall world, you have to validate, do we actually have the right thing? Is it working correctly? To be able to do that, the quality and testing really begins at the completion of the requirement phase, or what items you've taken off your product backlog and you know that you're actually going to be building and developing. There can be anything from very complex test cases and test scripts to very simple, we're going to walk through the same work process or the same work steps as the organization is doing. Understanding and signing off of those test cases and understanding and working out those bugs prior to going into production just makes for a more successful go live. At the end of the day, I've yet to be on a project where we've caught 100% of everything. There are things that are going to happen in the production world, especially in the IT realm. As much as we try to make systems similar, a non-production system mimic a production system, there are always some unique differences. So not only in the quality and testing do you want to make sure that you've signed off of everything, but you want to make sure that you establish what is that process going to be if we find anything. So again, you don't become reactionary. You have a plan for how to react to those items. And lastly, as you've gone through all those items, and again, whether it's a large project or a small project, an important piece is the project closeout, to make sure that you've finished all the invoices, any costing, that you've delivered everything that you have, you've archived your documentation, you've made that correct transition, that correct handshake over to those support teams. That is so critical to make sure that that can be supported ongoing, and that you're compiling your lessons learned. Now on a short project, compiling lessons learned at the end of the project is great. I encourage any teams that I'm on, as well as any of the resources that work for me, to be compiling those lessons learned throughout the project. If I'm on a 6-month or year project and we complete it, I am not going to remember what happened in month 1 that we should probably take a lesson from. Sometimes I don't remember what happened yesterday, but again, the more frequently that you can collect that information, the more effective it becomes, so you don't make that same mistake going forward. And don't forget to celebrate, especially on long projects, but even short projects. Celebrate those successes. We got through the testing phase. We only had X number of defects. It was great. We got through the launch, and even though we may have had a few things that we still had to correct, we were able to get that out to the end users, out to our customers. From a lessons learned perspective, again, depending on the length of the project, we are always going to have lessons learned. Every project we do, we're going to learn something new, and we're just going to get better and better. One of my favorite quotes is on here: it's only a failure if you don't learn something through that process. Keeping lessons learned to a simple area where you say, ask your team members for 1 to 3 pluses and deltas. And what I encourage with my teams is, if you're going to give me 3 negatives, you got to give me 3 positives. Sometimes, depending on the project, it's always easy to focus on, well, here's everything we did wrong. But if you got to the end of that project, you did some things right. Lastly, the summary: communicate, communicate, communicate. I can't say it enough. All the tools and all the techniques here, at the end of the day, it comes back to being able to communicate. Establish the project management roles up front. Understand what's going to be done internally, externally. If there's an external client, understand what your team members are going to be doing and responsible for. Understand which project management templates you're going to utilize. You don't have to use every project management template on every project. Make a decision, though, and then stick to those, and make sure that you anchor back to those. Keep it simple. Establishing project plans, it's okay if you have a small 6-week project and you only have a project plan with 8 activities on. That might be okay. Use the right things. And it's important to be transparent. Another one of my leaders always used to say to me, project management information bad project management information is not like fine wine. It does not get better with time. So while you want to make sure that you're communicating the correct information and not putting up false issues, when you do have an issue, that's what your tools are made for. Here's what we have. Here's how we're going to react to it. Do you agree with it? The sooner they know, the sooner everybody can make that reaction, and then make sure that we stay on track. And in my closing words for here again, I'll say it one more time: communicate, communicate, communicate. So we do have a few minutes left. We'll see if anybody has any questions.
We don't have any, Julie, on the chat function, but certainly we will open the line up to questions. I know we're towards the end of the time, but if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask, feel free to do it via the phone now. All right. One more. We do have contact information here. If it is something that you think of later that you would like to ask the question, certainly send it to info@nrconsults.com. In addition to that, this webinar will be on our website, nrconsults.com. If for any reason you want to visit again or if you want to share it with somebody within your organization. So it will be up online today. And as Julie mentioned, we do have several deliverables we had promised you upon registration. We will have those to you via the email that you provided during registration by the end of the week. So you will have those documents.
And then lastly, I love sharing project management information, and I'm happy to do it anytime. Our organization does provide a variety of services. We do training. We do lunch and learns. We do help teams at any level, from I just need a project manager to help me with this project, or I need somebody to come in and help me with some assessments on how we can get better at this. So that info@nrconsults.com, Jill will get that directed to the right person who will get in contact with you and help you with that moving forward. So I appreciate your time today. I know that I can talk about this all day long, so I'm glad that everybody joined us this afternoon, and I look forward to having future contact. Thanks, everybody.